Mentioning of the next speaker, as an organization and as an individual, we believe every victim has an opportunity for a second chance. And she needs our society can become a better place only when a victim can be transformed into a survivor, and a survivor is being transformed into a survivor champion. And I have the utmost privilege of welcoming our next speaker, who is a survivor champion, who is being well recognized and appreciated for the voice that she is bringing together on behalf of all the victims. So let me introduce you our next speaker, Malaika Oringo. Like I said, she hails from the beautiful landscape of Uganda. Malaika's journey has been one of the resilience, determination, leading her to become a powerful voice for victims of trafficking, specializing in addressing exploitation in Uganda, Kenya, Tanzania. She sheds light on the plight of women who find themselves trapped in the vicious cycle, particularly in the Middle East, now in India, shattered and vulnerable to be re-trafficking. As a talented speaker, campaigner, Malaika has graced the UN General Assembly, where she fearlessly highlighted the gaps in European legislation and policy against human trafficking. Her insights have been sought after by NGOs, researchers, law enforcement officials, educators, and their own. Malaika's contribution extend beyond speaking engagements. She serves as a member of ISTAC Survivor Advisory Council and works as a survivor inclusion engagement specialist for Salvation Army International as well. Her remarkable efforts haven't gone unnoticed, as in 2021, she was recognized and awarded by Child and Queen Silvia of Sweden for her relentless commitment to combating child sex trafficking in Europe. She was also the winner of MyVoiceForJustice project. Malaika Oringo's mission is profound and inspiring. She seeks to create an army of survival leaders, an alert community, just laws and policies, and well-informed service providers. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in inviting Malaika Oringo.
Thank you very much for that introduction. However, I'm having a technical problem. Could somebody share my PowerPoint? But I'll like us to first share a testimony from a survivor.
Sure.
I think you have it on your end.
Yeah. Just a moment while I share the...
I am Ksima Miriam, a survivor of human trafficking and a survivor leader. As a survivor leader, I help other survivors and victims in the process of healing. Being away from home is very challenging because you are cut off from your support system. You're in a new area, you lack who to contact immediately. You don't know who to face or who to run to. And at the end of the day, there is no support system. As a foreign victim, you endure the pain, the discrimination, the exploitation, not only from the people around you, but also the law enforcement. And things become worse when the law enforcement of the country you're in deports you back home. In the first place, you went for greener pastures, but you're back to zero. You have nothing to show. This increases the trauma from the abuse you went through because you managed to endure that abuse because you wanted to attain and achieve a certain goal. So without the access to justice or reintegration support that acknowledging your trauma, as the pain just goes deep and deep and deep, because there is rejection, not only from the community, but also from the people you love, your family. This makes you traumatized because you have nothing. You don't know where to start from. I really recommend that there should be establishment of coordinating cross-border support system that ensure that survivors and victims get compensation to address the exploitation suffered by all survivors and victims of human trafficking out there.
Thank you very much, Miriam. Her story resonates not only with me, but with a lot of survivors across the world. Because I always say it takes one survivor story to change someone else's. And as she mentioned that it's more worse when somebody is a victim and reintegrated back home without proper support. Being a survivor of exploitation from abroad, being in the Netherlands, her experience resonates with me. It's not, the lack of support is not only in Uganda or not in India, it's worldwide. That victims that are identified in foreign countries do not get the support they need because they're not looked as potential victims or because of the discriminatory system that exists in the countries where they're exploited. Thank you very much. It's an honor for me to participate in this symposium. My name is Malaika Oringo. I work with Salvation Army as a Survivor Global Inclusion Specialist. I'm seeing my colleagues online across the world. Hi. I'm also the founder of Footprint of Freedom, a survivor-led organization that works to break the cycle of human trafficking by empowering survivors like Miriam we've just seen to take the front line in the fight against human trafficking, to participate in the prevention, protection, advocacy, but also to support other survivors in their healing journey. For long, survivors have not been part of the solution. They've been looked at as beneficiaries to their service, to the services. Later, I'll talk about I'll let you know when to move the slide. Later, I'll talk about what is the importance of survivor engagement. So it's survivor inclusion. I'm also the director of the African Survivor Coalition. The African Survivor Coalition is part of Footprint program that is comprising of survivors across Africa. We are scaling up to 54 survivor members across Africa to kind of contextualize solutions as we see there's limitation in data. And most of solutions are exported from the global north. We want to contextualize African issues with survivor African solutions to see how we can come up with a robust solution. Next slide, please. Yeah, today we are talking about victim identification. But before we go deep into talking about victim identification, who is a victim? There is no single profile of a trafficking victim. Victims, it can be anybody. It can be of any race, of any nationality, someone who has disability, age and gender, sexual orientation, socioeconomic status, or educational level. Like what I'm trying to say, like, anybody can fall a victim of human trafficking. However, there are particular people who are actually more vulnerable to human trafficking. And those are the marginalized people in the community. Those with their disabilities, those in the refugee camps, those with the LGBT, that's the increasing number that we are seeing, but also children in foster care. And with that in mind, when we're looking to identify victims, we shouldn't look for those women and men who are in chains. They can be anyone. And today I want to talk about those red flags and indicators that we can look at to identify different victims. Next slide. Today, our former speakers have been talking about statistics and different variety of numbers across in Uganda, in India, big numbers of people enslaved in the world today. Today, there are over 1 million people enslaved in the world today. But for me, being on the ground and working with different victims and the survivor, I don't think this number really depicts what is happening, especially in countries like Uganda, where data is not enough, where victims are not identified, where child labor and child marriage is still a normalized situation. So where do these people fit in this data? So we need to look beyond data, these statistics, because I don't think they depict what human trafficking is. We need to contextualize our data. We need to contextualize how we find and define who is a victim, and call upon our government, Uganda and India, to kind of foster our national referendum to really put mechanism in place to identify victims, because most of the instruments depend on victims to identify themselves, which hardly happens. Next slide. As I mentioned, with the 50 million people, it's said nearly 1 out of every 150 people in the world is trapped in modern-day slavery. It can be sexual exploitation, forced labor. We've had from our former speaker about domestic servitude, organ removal, which is really increasing. We are seeing a lot of victims in Uganda being victims of organ trafficking, forced begging, which we see a lot in Uganda, children being on the street begging, thinking that maybe they are poor, but a lot of these kids are victims of forced labor, child soldier, and forced marriage. Why am I bringing these numbers out? I think we really need to understand that if we look at these massive numbers and imagine with the, I don't know if it's the 7 billion people in the world and 150 people in each is a victim of human trafficking, it calls the urgency of us to work as a collective solution to make sure that we reduce or do away with modern-day slavery, human trafficking in the world today. And due to the COVID and all, the COVID instance in the last few years, we see there's been an increase of 10 million people that have been forced into human trafficking, which shows that these numbers are accelerating as time comes, because with the post-COVID era, it has made even situation very hard for victims and survivors who have been supported. What I've seen that some of the victims that we supported and reintegrated in 2020 and getting support, Footprint has an empowerment center in Uganda, they had gotten some skilling, entrepreneurial skills, and also kind of handmade skills for them to get employable skills. But also we got them some loan. But because of the COVID, we realized that when they lost their income, most of the victims, the survivors that we integrated had to go back to re-exploitation. So we need also to look at what has the post-COVID era done to the victims or survivors that you've reintegrated in Uganda or that you are supporting back in India. Next slide. Now, to the topic of today, victim identification. What is victim identification? It refers to the process of recognizing and identifying individuals who have fallen victims of a particular crime. In this case, we are focusing on human trafficking. What does it entail? It entails identifying and understanding the signs and indicators that suggest a person may be a victim of human trafficking, so that that person can get assistance and protection. But for this to happen, it requires a comprehensive understanding of the various reasons why people end up into exploitation. But not only that, it requires laws and systems that support reintegration and support of victims. But at the same time, it also requires international collaboration. Julian has stated a very important point, that without international collaboration, where victims and survivors are exploited, and proper communication about these laws or the bilateral laws on labor, people who are looking for jobs abroad. If our governments in Uganda do not follow up in how these victims or people who are working abroad get the right support, are they paid well, what is their living condition, then these bilateral agreements just increase exploitation instead of supporting victims. And next slide, please. But what we have also to be aware with victim identification is that we've been introduced to human trafficking with chains, with people with malnutrition, people who shows physical indicators. But what we see today is that people do not have physical wounds. People do not have the physical appearance of exploitation. So we need to understand what are these invisible wounds. And these are displayed in trauma. These are displayed in the way people, you meet somebody who is de-associated, who kind of shows that is traumatized or is exposed, is having a set of emotional distress. So in order for you to support these victims, you need to be trauma informed. You need to understand what are these invisible wounds. And if I approach a victim, I always have to understand that there's a hidden story beyond what this victim is telling me. And sometimes if you don't see the physical wounds, you need to be patient until this victim or survivor starts to express them, as Miriam has just said. Next slide, please. So we've known what is victim identification, but who might recognize victims? Okay, it's you and me, it can be everybody, but there are certain people who are really kind of close to being able to identify victims, one of which are law enforcement. Most time they are the first respondent, especially when there are riots or somebody is being called for domestic violence or somebody who is being caught petty thieving, or somebody is being called that the law enforcement is called upon that somebody is being is conducting fraud in the bank. It's upon the law enforcement to identify, is this fraud enhanced by a trafficker or is a normal form of crime? So law enforcement are the first people who should be able to understand or to identify victims, and they should have the right skills and the training in order to identify victims in a trauma-informed way and in the culture-centered way. Healthcare professionals. This resonates well with me. During the time when I was in exploitation, I went to the hospital several times. Just like I mentioned that wounds, survivors do not show visible wounds. And you, of course, when you go with the trafficker, you do not expect it. The victim to say, please help me. There are different indicators that you could look as a health worker when you are working, diagnosing this victim. It can be the body language between the person who is bringing her. Sometimes they have dressed up, but they have bruises in their body. Sometimes they have multiple sexual STDs, but at the same time, we see within my work here in the Netherlands that they are forced to have so many abortions in a year. So these are so many few indicators that you can look at. Also educators, social workers and case managers. I think these are gatekeepers of really finding victims of human trafficking. They can come in as victims of domestic violence or victims of other forms of violence. But within your policies or within your work plan, if you understand some indicators and how to communicate with these survivors and victims who come into your centers, you'll be able to identify who is a victim and who is a survivor. Educators. I think these are people who are left out because we don't think that they have a role in play. As I mentioned, that who might recognize victims and survivors is all of us. Like this is, we're all supposed, it's a whole community approach and it's a whole stakeholder approach. So we see that victims sometimes are still coming to school, but still experiencing either sexual exploitation or sex trafficking, or folks forced to into pornography. But sometimes when you have a good connection with the students and knowing their changes in mental health and how they relate to you, you could be able to support this victim before the exploitation goes far. The Migration and Custom Office, for example, of the recent time when there's COVID-19, we realized in Saudi Arabia when people were thrown back on the street, most of the people who were thrown on the street did not have documents like passports. But the reason why these people are not having passports is because the minute that a person, a recruiter or your employee takes a passport from an employee, it becomes a crime. It becomes a part of labor trafficking. So when in the migration offices, if people come to you, which is very, very absurd that they are very inactive in supporting us when we send them people who do not have passports to support them to be repatriated back in their homes. So they should be able to identify why is this person not having their passport. Secondly, in order for the victim to get justice in the host countries where they've been exploited, they need evidence. We need the backup from the system and also from the, for example, from the migration officer for this victim to be compensated before they leave the country. These are some like also substance abuse technician. Here in the Netherlands, I will give an example here. A lot of victims, for them to be lured or coerced to stay into victimhood, the traffickers coerce or force the victim to continue taking drugs. And most of the victims who are stuck in sex industry are already addicts of cocaine or other form of substance abuse. So in order for us to see through this substance abuse, we need to support these victims and survivors to get them to their sanity in order for them to tell their story. Next slide, please. In mindful of time, I'm going to rush through the next part, but this is very essential. One of the major people who should play a role, or who are playing a role in the global north, especially here in Europe and also in America, is the private sector. For example, the bank has a big role in identifying victims, but they can identify victims in different ways. For example, if there are unusual cash transactions or large sums of money. In my experience, I've been working with victims and survivors who have been exploited not only for sexual services, not only for labor services, but also for their financial credit. That traffickers use their identity cards, they use their passports to open up bank accounts. And when they open up their bank account, they use this money, they use the bank accounts of the victims to do illegal businesses. And when the law enforcement find out, the person who is the owner of the bank account is the one who is blacklisted. So it's important for the banking institution also to come in to identify some red flags in the banking process of victims and survivors. Also tattoo shops. I don't know if in Uganda or in India, that they've realized that some of victims of sex trafficking have got tattooed by their traffickers. And one of the red flags that you could see, some indicators is a barcode. you know, when you go to the supermarket, there's that black barcode. Sometimes they have barcodes, and sometimes they have initials, like the name. The name shows that this is, if the person is called Michael, then the initial is M as a tag on a woman, so that the person, even though she goes to another place, other people could know that this person belongs to this trafficker. Sometimes there's a currency tattoo, or crowns and roses, which I see very often with victims of human trafficking. Next, please. As I mentioned that in order for us to identify victims, we need to also know what are the red flags, what are the things we can look into. Some of the signs can be physical, as I mentioned. Someone might be having bruises, isolation and restriction in communication, fearful and avoidant behaviors, but lack of control of their finance, as I mentioned in the last slide, inability to leave their working location, excessive working hours, and also psychological indicators and distress. Next slide. I wanted to share with you that some of us find it difficult to adhere working with survivors who continue coming to our shelters for services, but they still going back into exploitation. There's a thin line between victims of sex trafficking being attached to their abusers because of this term called Stockholm Syndrome. What is Stockholm Syndrome? It is a psychological phenomenon in which an hostage or victim of abuse develops feelings of empathy, affection, even loyalty towards a person who's abusing them. As we know that traffickers abuse and break their victim to an extent of submission. So when victims are getting used to this abuse, they get used to that sense of making sure that you stay in abusive situation, because that is, you've been psychologically aligned to believe that it's either your fault if you're doing something wrong, but at the same time, what these abusers do, they keep on rewarding them. If you do something good, they reward them either with drugs or with some money or with some support. So some survivors or victims in sex trafficking have been in deeper with these traffickers. When you exit them and give them shelter, this other world becomes lonely. So they keep on running back to these traffickers, especially if you do not have a trauma-informed care system that understand why they're doing that. They'll keep on running back. On average, it takes 7 times for a woman to leave an abusive relation, 7 times, which means you should have resources in place to understand that this person is going to run back and then come back, run back and come back. So this is true with women that are exiting prostitution. We put in place exit program, we put them in place shelters, but then they still have a sense of attachment to the trafficker. And what do? We stigmatize them, we stop them from coming to our shelters because we do not understand this. So please get to know, internalize yourself with what is Stockholm Syndrome so that you identify it in different victims that you're working with. Next slide. Why is it difficult for a victim to be identified? A lot have been said with our first speakers when they talked about, because of the nature of the crime, most victims are not, some are hidden so that it's not easy to find them, but also the human trafficking identification sometimes require victims to come to you to say I'm a victim, which they hardly come because of different reasons. Stigma and shame, it was talked about. One of the things that I was fearing to even speak about, I was a minor at that time, to identify myself with what happened to me, it's rather say that I was a victim of a different form of exploitation, because the stigma and shame that comes along with it becomes a barrier for victims to really identify themselves, especially if you're going to be stigmatized by the community who do not understand. There's lack of trust with authorities. We come from a background, I'm sorry if there's law enforcement here on call in India and in Uganda, you've not been friendly in the way you handling victims in different forms. It can be any petty crimes. I've grown up knowing policemen are brutal, they are not very kind. And imagine me when I was exploited as a minor to the Netherlands. I was promised to go to school. I wasn't coerced, I did not have chains. I followed this trafficker to the Netherlands. So I had this sense of shame that actually somebody asked me, in Uganda, we say, Ania Kutuma, who sent you? It's because you wanted a quick solution. Do you think we all didn't want to go to school? So the language we use when we think about survivorhood and why people end up in human trafficking makes it difficult for victims to speak up. And also being unaware of our victim status. First, I didn't know, for one, that I'm a victim of human trafficking because what I saw in the pictures before, you should have chains. I wasn't chained. I wasn't in the dungeon. What I was experiencing is mental and psychological abuse. So it did not really resonate with me that I'm a victim to come up until I was found. And migration status. As we mentioned, that traffickers take our passports. So I was undocumented, which already makes me illegal in this country. It makes it difficult for me to speak up, go to the police, because I've already broken the law for me to be in that country. There are systematic barriers. Thank you, Mutoko, for the message. Systematic barriers such as when somebody is exploited in the foreign countries, there are laws that, that stipulate, for example, for one to be identified as a victim, you need to bear witness who trafficked you. But as you know, no trafficker tells you, my name is John, this is my passport number, find me here. There is always a complicity of, even it's a trail, someone who gets you from Uganda, moves you to the airport, leaves you there, then you get another person who transports you to until the destination. You might face 5 to 10 traffickers into a process of exploitation before you get the real trafficker. And also the real trafficker never shows sometimes their faces. So these systematic barriers that says in order for someone to get support, legal support, or to be identified as a victim, you need to bear witness or to have proof that this person has been trafficked in this place and within this person, which is always very difficult. Another slide, please. I'm going to, there's a story here, but you can leave your comments in the chat. We've talked about victim identification, and we've talked about red flags. Here is a story of Yasmin. Yasmin comes in an HIV clinic screening. Through her intake paper, she said she's 19. The nurse observed that she looks pretty younger. Yasmin tells the nurse that she's mature for her. Yasmin tells the nurse she's mature for her age and very experienced. She has a tattoo, or a tattoo name on her arm said LIIG. During the exam, she consistently received text messages on her phone. She answers the call, "Daddy, don't worry, I'll be done soon." She tells the nurse her boyfriend, who is 30, is so in love with her, and he cannot stand if she's away from him. So from the screening result indicates that although Yasmin is HIV negative, she has multiple other STI. The nurse asks Yasmin whether she uses protection during sex, but she snags and sometimes says, "I do," sometimes she says, "I don't." So she says she wants, I can't see the rest, but she says she won't be in her life forever. because that is her boyfriend, she's looking for cash. Take your time to go in the chat, maybe during the discussion, to say what are the red flags that you can see in this story. Next slide, please. But this is the most, I'm very passionate about this part. Supporting and reintegrating survivors is very crucial, because freedom is more than rescue. What most of organizations and institutions are focusing on is you rescue somebody, support them into repatriation, drop them at Entebbe airport and say, we've done our job. Freedom, that is where the real freedom of a person starts, when a person gets support and gets economic, psychological independence. If a person has not done that, then you're doing nothing, or else the cycle of exploitation can continue. So these are the few steps that you can take to support survivors. But considering your financial resources you have at hand, I know my suggestion might be ambiguous for Uganda, but let's think big. The right for a victim or survivors to have this support is mandated by the government and the civil society for the victim to get this. So it's important either for the government to make sure that they get these basic needs and follow-ups. Next slide, please. But in order to talk into what support survivors need, we need to understand that every survivor has their own gifts, needs, and goals. And they're in their spaces, different spaces in their healing journey. One thing I realized that when I was first reintegrated as a survivor, they had in place empowerment program for tailoring and I think drawing. They have their mind that, for example, I'm an African, I'm in the Netherlands, I know sewing, or I know how to do some of the things that they claim typical of African. So they put, when your interventions are put survivors in the box without asking them, what are your gifts? What really resonates with you for you to strive in the society? Then you miss out the real empowerment of the survivor. They wasted 2 years of my life teaching me how to stitch and sew. It's not my thing. My thing is empowering and advocating women, speaking on behalf of other women. So my voice was censored and put in the wrong place. So what I recommend with you, try to do a need assessment with your victim and the survivor, give them appropriate reintegration support. And the minute I got the right support, I'm here today because my voice, my skills in advocacy, my passion in fighting for justice for other women was facilitated. Resources were put into that place. My education was also put in that place. Next slide, please. Yeah, their immediate support. I think one of them is safety. And one thing we lack when we repatriate survivors, especially from countries abroad, when we bring back them to Uganda, we do not think about their safety. You bring them at the Entebbe airport and they say you have family members, go home. But there are a lot of other issues that are transpiring with this survivor. So what is safety to you? What is safety in the Ugandan perspective? Victim needs basic needs. As a person who has an NGO and a Ugandan, I know this is a luxury I'm talking to you right now, but I mean, it should be essential that we lobby to advocate to make sure that we have resources, at least for survivors, to get the first basic needs, that is food and clothes, or help them go to the hospital if they have STIs, and also ensure that maybe they have rehabilitation support to regain their skills. There's legal support and advocacy. The transnational legal support and advocacy is zero when it comes to India and Uganda. When you've been affected in India and you come back to Uganda, then your crime ends in India. But we need this follow-up and prolonged support of survivors to get their justice. Reintegration support, it can be with family and members. Salvation Army, they're doing a great job. We are doing a great job on that, making sure they reunite with their families, either with church and creating a sense of community. Next slide, please. With this slide, I'm just going to focus on trauma-informed care. Coming from Uganda and being an African, we are not really trauma-informed because the culture tells us the strong keep on going. Like when I used to speak to some victims and survivors here, when I talk about stress and trauma, they said, this is a white people thing. African people, we don't have trauma. And I hear it a lot in Uganda or in Africa, but trauma is real. So trauma-informed care also takes into consideration not only the trauma of the person you're working with, but the trauma that this person is also bringing to you, because trauma-informed care looks at the trauma of the person and also the secondary trauma that you can get, you who is working directly with this survivor or victim, hearing her story of exploitation over and over again. So they should be having policies and guidelines for you, who is also a responder, to get met to someone to talk to after hearing horrific experiences of this victim and survivor. Another thing I would emphasize is follow-up, long-term follow-up. Sometimes people ask me, what is the time frame for a person to support a person? 6 months and then the person is on their feet. There's no timeline. When you follow up on the person, the automatic system makes it clear with you that the person is ready to keep going. For example, a lot of people, survivors who were supported in 2020 in Uganda, before the COVID-19, had to go back into re-exploitation because there was a change in either the money they got for their businesses or or their homesteads. So if we do not follow up on the current extent, it's like the cycle of human trafficking is going to continue. They are going to go back. Last slide, please. This is very important and very essential to me, that in order for any identification to be comprehensive, in order for the support system to be need-based, we need to involve survivors. Survivors are the main stakeholders that are instrumental in the fight against human trafficking. Why? Because they have first-hand lived experience. They've lived in this process. They understand the strategies of traffickers. They understand the laws, the gaps in the law. They understand the tendencies of the traffickers that lower them into exploitation. So we need, in order to have a comprehensive victim identification and support, we have to make sure that survivors' voices at every decision making table, from the implementation of program, from foundation of the program and implementation of program. They need to be employed not only as volunteers in your organization, but as consultants, as employees. You need to partner with survivor-led organization to inform your work. The current reason why there's a big deficit in data collection is because the research is dominated by people who do not understand the trends and the whole rhyme of human trafficking. So I call upon any stakeholders, governments, institutions, civil society, that until survivors at every decision-making table they're empowered enough to inform your practices, all your instruments, your policies are going to be misinformed, and they are going to cause more harm than good. I'm going to leave this here because of the time constraint. The PowerPoint will be sent out. You can reach me on different social medias, from Salvation Army, but also from Footprint to Freedom, the website, also the Survivor Coalition, on Instagram, on LinkedIn. And we as a survivor, not only in East Africa, but Africa in general, We are here to support your collaborative response in the fight against human trafficking. And thank you for your time and listening to me.
The beauty of having a survivor is we do have a hard pill to chew on. And thank you so much, Malaika, for challenging all of us and for sharing that survivor lens. And I totally resonate and understand your perspective. And thank you so much for bringing our focus, retracking our focus on building systems around the survivor and not around ourselves or not around our own capacities. So thank you so much for that insights. Yes, we'll have a quick questions. I know we are far ahead of time. We wanted to have a breakout session, but I think with all of your permission, either we will go ahead or skip it. But yes, we will have this time for questions. Please raise your hand and you can go ahead. I see Colonel Chatandra's hand raised. Please, Colonel, you could ask your question.
I just want to recommend the lady who has just spoken. I want to thank her for what she has really elaborated to us all. I thank God that she was trafficked by perpetrators to the other side of the world, but the devil did not traffic her to her side, to his side. So we are really grateful that you are now part of the team who are helping the people to understand, because this issue of trafficking is not it's just a thing that people don't understand, or maybe because we are poor, because of poverty and other things. But I thank for her that really she has done so well to say many things. But I just wanted to find out, when she was trafficked from her country and where she went, what actually happened? Hello.
Hello.
Yes. So I just want to understand more, because we are.
Yeah. Thank you for that question. By the way, I'm a Ugandan, 100% a Ugandan, proud Ugandan.
Yes. Thank you.
As the name goes. Part of my work, I was trafficked as a minor. That was when I was 16. Promised to go to school. But I started being in the anti-human trafficking work the last 17 years. One thing I realized that what is important is not what happened to the person, because we need to understand that when the person shares what happened, is triggering and re-traumatizing them. So I got the privilege, I learned the hard way the last 17 years, that the first way that I was introduced into the anti-human trafficking is sharing what happened to me. And it took a lot from me, because reliving that is the worst, because I don't think anybody wants to go back to their worst nightmare. So one thing that I've developed is a way of communicating response, not only focusing on trauma stories, but also just indicating areas what could have done right, or why was I vulnerable to human trafficking, so that you will be able to identify those people. The reason why there are not so many survivor leaders, because they think the arena, the space has only the trauma story, but survivors are more than what happened to them. I'm an educator. I have other skills to bring on the table. So what I've realized that I work towards bringing the whole scope of human trafficking experience, but leaving out the traumatic areas, because one thing I've realized, they do not change the trajectory of legal frameworks. It's used to inform people before, but doing this for the last 17 years, it has not worked. So what happened was that I was coerced to go to school, and it did not happen. It would not happen. I ended up being sold to other people, but good enough. I ended up going, years later, I ended up going to school and managed to get my degrees and masters. But at the same time, what lured me into exploitation was lack of access to education. I was an orphan. My mom had passed away. Just like these are the vulnerabilities that led people to being exploited. He also, by the way, I was trafficked by a Red Cross worker who was holding a Bible. Maybe that's very essential for you to let you know that they come in very different. They are lions dressed in the sheep skin. As a Christian, he knew that I would trust somebody who holds the Bible. So besides being exploited by somebody who is very close to God, I was also vulnerable as a young girl. I just needed an opportunity to go to school, and that did not happen. And I advised anybody on the call that we should stop sensationalizing survivor experience, because they get traumatized, they get re-triggered, and especially in Uganda, where there's no psychological help, because when survivors share their stories, they do not have a psychological person or a mental health person who supports them. Then they end up draining into their traumatic experience. Thank you, sir. But I'll be in Uganda soon. On a private moment, I'll share with you my story. Yeah.
Thank you, Malaika. I totally respect the decisions and the choice that you've made, and it's so true. Yeah, we get stuck with what happened and we hardly move ahead to the response. So I have one such question for you. From a victim to becoming a survivor champion, I'm sure it's not easy. And like you yourself mentioned, people get waded off or they get drained away during the course. But how did you succeed to become the survivor champion, to presenting at UN, to getting awards from Sweden, Netherlands, and various other platforms? So share with us, how has that journey been, and how can we as partners or social organizations or individuals help such identify and help in that processing of survivor champions?
Thank you very much for that question. Yeah, now thinking about it, it's almost 17, 18 years ago. It has been a long journey coming. But what I can say is that I had the right people around me. It first took a social worker who believed in me, who understood my energy. And maybe I want to emphasize that besides a person becoming a victim, they're a person with skills and aspiration. I was born to fight for justice, and I kept on communicating with it. So it was easy for me to get aligned in that direction. My social work identified my skills. She's from Salvation Army. So what she used to do is that she used to bring me along when she's doing trainings. Because that time I was undocumented in the Netherlands. They withdrew my permit because they didn't get the trafficker. So I was undocumented for 10 years, which means I didn't have a right to go to school, a right for any support, or a right to do some formal training. So she took me, it was a dedicated social worker, identified my skills, kind of developed on them despite the barriers. So I used to go with meetings with her every time she does training on identifying red flags or how to support victims, issues with voodoo impacting survivors. Then he will give me a slot every time she does a training. In this way, she was developing me into becoming a communicator and also taught me how to do PowerPoints. But I think also one thing I should advise as an organization, you should have an action plan of a survivor journey to leadership. There are 5 stages. The first stage, the victim comes to you, she's all traumatized, and you even wouldn't know what she really wants. And sometimes when they come in, they want a lot of things that you really need to give them time to internalize. Secondly, the next stage is that when there is a stage 2, when they realize what happened to them. That is, they get so sad, they get so withdrawn. What do you do in that stage? Refer them to the psychologist, give them the mental support, but at the same time, bring a lived experience, a survivor to support them. The third stage is that they realize, oh, I can walk out of this. I can be better than this. So what happens? They recognize with this plan, the journey with survivor have a plan. It has stage 1. Stage 1, you let a survivor deal with the victimhood. Second stage, support the survivor in their mental health. Third stage, start to identify the survivor with which skills. I think it's all about identifying skills and allocating them in the right direction. And third, then you start giving them, link them to possibilities to how they can really use these skills. Because this is what happened to me, that they identified my skills as an advocate. They started giving me access to podiums. They started access to trainings. And the third stage is making sure that you give the survivor the platform, the agency. So I ended up being also employed. So in the nutshell, I think it's all about having one person. It can be one person who believes in you.
Mm.
And another thing is that the system, I can't say blessed because it's not the right word now, but I was exploited in a system that also supports reintegration of survivors. So where there's access to further development. So it was easy for me to get, to walk out of this system of victimhood easily. But at the same time, we have a collaborative system in Europe where it's easy if I'm in Holland for a person from Sweden to know what I'm doing, because we have this collaboration working ethics that it has made us a voice of one person to be recognized easily across Europe or beyond. But then maybe I can say that if you're struggling with saying, how can I help that one person, especially when it comes to Uganda, where somehow everything is a bit wrong, I want you to think a story of a starfish.
Mm.
A starfish, there was a young girl there was a storm and this young girl on the sea, and a lot of fish were thrown on the shore. And this girl was throwing the fish back to the sea. So these are the million people across the world enslaved. And you were throwing them back in the sea. And the man said, why are you wasting time? There are so many, you wouldn't be able to save them. That girl said to that one victim, to that one fish, it matters. So when I put it in terms of survivors and victims, to that one survivor you support, I was supported by one lady. But in that process of helping me, I've helped more than thousands of victims across the world. Because as a fish, I was put back in the sea to kind of breathe. So if you have that metaphor, it's not about quantity of people. It's about the quality, and that one person you support.
Amazing. So true, the story of a starfish. And yes, at the end of the day, I think all of us can take courage and can take hope that you matter. Every small, big deed that we as individuals or we as organization do does matter. And thank you so much, Malaika, for reiterating that and giving us all the hope that we need. We're 3:25, but any other question for Malaika before we wrap it up? Okay, 3 more seconds to ask your question.
Malaika, this is Sharon here. I would like to know, when you work as a survivor and you find others working, what is the difference that you find?
You're on mute, Malaika.
I beg your pardon.
He's asking the difference between you as a survivor champion working and rendering service, and there are other survivor champions that are also working, right? So what is the difference between you and them? What?
No, not champions. The normal people like us. Oh yeah, those were not victims. Those were not victims.
Yes, I get you, sir. What is the difference between a survivor working with the survivors and the non-survivors working with survivors? Yeah, isn't it? I think the difference is small. Is that I can resonate with the person easily because I've walked her shoe within her shoe. For example, I can understand her silence when she doesn't speak. Then I know what she's saying. So is that we have that connection with other survivors, but also the survivor can get easily trust with somebody who has lived experience because then they have shared shame, let me say. For me, it took me almost 16 years to meet somebody like me. So but when I met people with my lived experience, I became more, I said, okay, I'm not the only one. It became more easy for me to do my work. But at the same time is that the survivors can support you into things that you can take obvious. For example, you can start a shelter. You have these resources, you have a good intention, but then when you think about safety, you say, well, I've put it in a normal area, there's no traffickers around, but then you do not think about the psychological safety. I'll give you an example. I went to a shelter, and the shelter owner had gone to, I think, maybe Kenya or somewhere, and had an artifact of like a voodoo. But for him, it looked very nice. So it was a big picture. And I was escorting a survivor who had been exploited because of voodoo contracts. He was taken to a shrine to sell her freedom to this person. So every time I'm taking this person, she's like, I hate that office. It just gives me a negative vibe. But these are the things that then I told the director that this artifact is good for you because it's a souvenir, but it's traumatizing somebody. So these are the few things that survivor can able to work with you to identify gaps in your policies, gaps in your data collection, gaps in your services that you cannot see, not because you're not qualified, but this is a sixth sense that a person has with lived experience.
Very profound. Thank you for sharing that, Malaika. Yes, with paucity of time, I will have to skip away breakout sessions. We were so looking forward to having breakout discussions, but I think we will skip it out. And because this is very interesting, Malaika, would you like to take any other question, or can we wrap it up?
It will be my honor to answer the question. I'm already here. That's why we are here, finding solutions.
Yeah. Anybody else that has any other questions?
I have one more.
Yeah.
Okay.
What do you think a person who's not been trafficked but who's working for trafficked person should keep in mind when he's working with survivors?
What is, I'm sorry, your network is a bit broken.
What, as a non-survivor or as a non-victim, when I'm working with victims or survivors, what are some of the aspects that I need to bear on my mind while I'm working with this victim survivors?
Well, I think one big element, especially depending on the type of exploitation the person has, the most difficult people are survivors of sex trafficking, especially if they've been exploited for so many years. Sometimes it looks like it's too late for them to get support because they are very aggressive, they are very redundant, and they are very non-responsive. So what you should put consideration is the patience that is required for these survivors to really open up, but at the same time, have enough reflection periods within your investigation, your short time stay. This reflection period helps survivors kind of recollect what happens to them. I, for one, I got so triggered, and so I can't call it, I got so traumatized as a child, as a minor when I was exploited, that I had to block my experience during the time of exploitation. So when I got out, I wasn't really remembering, but people do not get it because you choose to protect yourself. So at some point, you're going to meet survivors who they have a bit of inconsistencies, and they do not remember the occurrences day by day. You need to understand that with trauma, some survivors or victims choose to block themselves and numb their experience. And some who have been using substance abuse, for example, it blacks them out from being part of the occurrence. So they do not have the actual experiences of what happened in a moment in time, but they come back to them.
Mm.
But I think what is more essential is having a system in place that is trauma-informed. You need to train everyone around the survivor to understand what is victim-centered, what is survivor-centered, and what is trauma-informed. Survivors, we tell our story over and over again. I can't even imagine how I told my story until it became a song. Like when you meet the first respondent, you tell it to the police, then you tell it to the doctor, then you tell it to the volunteer, then you tell it to the boss and the boss's friend. So you become a storyteller. So we need to put dignity onto this survivor. The more you minimize the survivors from retelling her story, she moves away from victimhood for her to regain sight of survivorhood so that she can be able to reboot her system. I was able to know what happened to me after 2 years, like bit by bit. But unfortunately, the system was not patient. The reflection period is 3 months. By the time I was thrown out of the system because I wasn't remembering a lot of things. But when I remembered, I was already blocked. I couldn't come back. So we need to consider all these psychological elements. We also need to educate people around survivors, but also make sure that you have look for resources that are for long term. Most time we invest on short term support of survivors, but if something happens between there's a high chance between 6 months for 1 year, a survivor goes back to re-exploitation if something goes wrong. So you should, and it's always resource-based, it's always that people do not have the right knowledge to support them. And if some faith-based organizations are a bit discriminatory when it comes to people with other sexual orientations, that if you have a discriminatory clause that I bring in anybody, regardless of their gender, their sexual orientation, then you are able to look at the victim as a victim, not as the other tags that identify them. And there's a growing number of victim boys within human trafficking. We need to understand that boys are not going to speak up like girls. Actually, their wounds are even deeper to even understand. So we have to create more special emphasis on how to speak to male victims of human trafficking, because naturally men masculinity doesn't prompt them to speak up. So in order to serve them, you need to have training, or you need to put a mechanism in place that also emphasizes on victims that are male. Another thing I see is compassion fatigue from people working with survivors. Survivors, we come with a lot of luggage, like a lot of luggage. I come to your shelter, but then I have legal problem, I have financial problem, I have health problem, I have back home problems. So then you who is dealing with me, you have a bit of not only re-traumatization, but you get compassion fatigue. So you need to practice self-care. You need to know where to put a stop, that I can do this. If I cannot do this, I'm going to refer Malaika to another person, so that you guard your mental and spiritual energy, or else you cannot serve from an empty cup.
Beautiful. Thank you, Malaika. And it's so true that gone are the days when only girls or women were the victims, and today we see quite a good number, a lot of number of men and boys being victimized as well. Thank you so much. With that, we wrap up the Q&A for Malaika. Thank you so much. I think we would have all had a standing ovation for all the efforts, for your story, for the passionate champion of change you are, and for the voice that you're resonating with many, many millions. So thank you so much, Malaika. More power and strength to you and your organization. And we did have few of your representatives join as well. Thank you, everyone, for that. And in our midst, I would like to acknowledge the presence of Ugandan High Commission based in Delhi. We had Jonata, and we also have Huntington with us. Huntington, would you just want to greet or say something? You're on mute.
Mute.
Yes.
Okay. Here in Delhi, it's a good afternoon. Good afternoon. I want to thank the organizers. I want to thank the participants. You're talking about human trafficking between India and Uganda, and us as Uganda High Commission. This is what we are in every day. We get calls from girls that are trafficked here. We survive, they are calling. We have people that we rescue. We have NGOs like Red Rock that are having some Ugandans in shelters. Actually, to me, it was more of listening. Then, but there are, us as government, I would have loved having like representatives from government of Uganda, either migration, we have a task force called Human Task Force. I expected some officers here. But talking from Uganda High Commission, there is also a lot being done here, like on the challenges of legal challenges. How do these traffickers here, how can they be punished? When we save these girls and we repatriate them home, how can the trafficker who is not even a Ugandan from another country or from here, how can that trafficker be punished? All those are the things that have been worked, that we are still working on, and we hope at one time we shall get a solution. But I also want to thank the government of India, because we have got an amnesty. Most of these people, when they reach here, of course, this have been talked about, they confiscate the passports, everything from them. But when they call us and we go and rescue them, we register them with an immigration department here called FRRO that gives them amnesty to go back home free, so long as that person can get an air ticket, but at least is saved from paying overstay, and the government has helped a lot, and very many people have benefited from that. And that is also an achievement, the biggest one. It is also not true that it's only Ugandans that are being trafficked here. We have statistics. We have also other countries that are also facing the same challenges. So I think I would have talked a lot, but now that the time is over, let me thank you so much. But a lot is being done. Us as the High Commissioner representing the government of Uganda here. But the organizers, I wish you could also involve government officers, because we've done a lot at the airports, we've done a lot. I thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Huntington. Tomorrow we will have Ambassador Simon Mulango. He is a representative from the government addressing to us on the legal framework. Yes, future, this is just the beginning. You know, we just began with Uganda and we just began with this first symposium. We have lots miles to go ahead and to bridge that resilience and gap, and we will definitely take your suggestion into consideration. I also want to acknowledge our partners Red Oak and Willow International. We have their representatives over here, with whose support we were able to repatriate 9 survivors as of now, and we're looking and working on more survivors to be repatriated soon. And yes, like Mr. Huntington mentioned, through Amnesty International, that's been of great support for us, and we really appreciate your support in repatriating all of these 9 victims so far. Thank you so much.